This is the Sixth Man Show, an Orlando Magic podcast, with your hosts, Kevin Tucker and Jonathan Osborne, covering all things Magic basketball. By fans, for fans. Go Magic! What's going on, Orlando Magic fans? You guys are back with the Sixth Man Show. Today is September 12th, 2024. Jonathan Osborne here, and joined by my co-host, Kevin Tucker. Kevin, what is going on?
What's up, Jonathan? Glad to be back. Glad to be hanging with you. For those that, maybe have been following the saga of my health this summer, this time next week, hopefully, fingers crossed, the surgery will have been completed. I will still be alive, all those things. But yeah, surgery's still on go for Wednesday, September 18th. So we're gonna see how that goes. But yeah, doing excited, Jonathan. Just count down the days for that, to be honest.
Right there with you. Not that I'm not excited for you to have it, just because it's when I think about it that way, it's kind of weird. Like, you have had so long to prepare for it. So you're sort of just like, hey, let's get this thing over with. I'm more so like, I just want it to be over for your sake, so that you can just get back to living a normal life and feeling better and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not excited for you to have surgery, but I'm excited for you to get better and recover and all that kind of stuff. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, you're going to be in, our thoughts and our prayers. And hopefully you'll be able to bounce back and, just maybe a couple of weeks off and you'll be back. But we're going to wait until, you're recovering and figuring all that stuff out to see how quickly you're going to be back. But Kevin, really quickly, we do have to talk about Evan Fournier once again. And I'm totally kidding, because I think we've gotten at least half of the comments on the last video were like, I can't believe it's 2024 and you guys are taking 12 minutes to talk about Evan Fournier. So I won't put you all through that again. But we are in our second week now of our Eastern Conference preview series. You will recognize today's guest, Bob Schmidt from the Fear The Fro podcast. He was on our show earlier, and I don't think that was the summer. I guess the end of the spring, as we went into the playoff series against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So he is back to sort of recap that playoff series, but also talk about some of the changes that the Cavs underwent this offseason and sort of as we look forward to next season. So stay tuned for that conversation a little bit later. And our next topic we're going to talk about sort of ties into that. Really, the only Magic news that came out this week was that the Wagner brothers, Mo and Franz, both appeared on, I believe it's called the Bench Seat podcast, which Georges Niang hosts. Georges Niang was a very controversial, polarizing figure, in the playoff series. Really a point of contention for a lot of Magic fans, as he turned the series into a pretty chippy one pretty early on, which I enjoyed. But you watch this interview with Georges Niang and his co-host and the Wagner Bros, and you kind of like Georges Niang, at least hate him less.
He's a better podcast host than maybe a basketball player. No, just kidding. He is a serviceable basketball player. Didn't play well in the series against the Magic, obviously. But yes, highly entertaining. I'm curious how that happened. Like, Mo and Franz coming on that show, I don't know what kind of relationship they had with Niang before the series, but I'm wondering if that series, maybe ignited, that the conversations that happened there. I admittedly haven't watched the whole thing yet, so maybe they talk about that. But I've seen probably a dozen clips on social media, and all of them were highly entertaining and very fun. So I'm definitely going to go watch that this weekend. Lots of things that I thought were really, really cool. I don't know if I would pick a couple of things I really liked the most. One of them was Niang obviously talking about the atmosphere in Orlando. He talked about the fact that, obviously they potentially rigged this matchup, right, with the Magic, allegedly. But they talked about, going down to Orlando for Game 3. They were like, yeah, whatever. It's Orlando, because of the last, couple seasons before that, the home environment, wasn't all that to be worried about. And then Game 3 happened. We blow the doors off and we dominate them, if you will, Jonathan. We blow the doors off of Cleveland there in Game 3, and they're like, wow, that place was loud. That place was rocking. And Niang's co-host, who I don't remember his name, I apologize, but talked about how the environment was awesome. The fan entertainment stuff. Actually, he talked about the mascot as well. So anyway, that was really cool to hear. And then to hear Franz turn around and kind of give the backstory about that. Franz's rookie season, where you win 22 games and the home games aren't really like home games for some of the big opponents, Lakers, Warriors, so on and so forth. To where his year 2, when Paolo got there, they started winning more games. You could feel the tide turning. And then he talked about this past season, his year 3, and how they just felt the love from the fans all season long, and culminating in that awesome home playoff run where we went undefeated and won all 3 games relatively, especially the first 2 relatively handily. So that was a really cool segment. I definitely enjoyed that. But yes, the whole thing looks very entertaining.
Yeah, to your point, I don't remember the co-host name, but him talking about the experience at the Magic game, it was really similar to the way I describe going to a Magic game to other people. Like, if you're there for the basketball like we are, like, who cares about a lot of the other stuff that's going on? But if you're there just sort of as an experience to see what an NBA game is about, but also be entertained at various points of the evening, during dead balls and halftime and during timeouts, like, it really is a spectacle. Like, it's something that you can bring your kids to, and they will be thoroughly entertained throughout the entire game, not necessarily just the basketball game. So to hear him talk about that was pretty cool. One of the parts that made me laugh, and one of the first clips that I saw, was George Niang talking about playing against Franz prior to Franz being drafted. And he was, Franz is trying to dribble and do all this kind of stuff. And he was talking trash to Franz. It was like, the only team that's going to want you are the effing Orlando Magic, because the Magic were bad at that point. And then it's funny that he ends up getting drafted by the Magic. And then here he is, like, busting, George Niang in the playoff series. And then hearing them talk about how, George would throw like a little elbow at Mo, and then Mo would be like, all right, but if I do something, like, you better not act hurt, because now I'm going to get you back. And then him talking about how what George and Mo are worried about during an NBA game is very different than what Franz is thinking about, just in terms of their roles and their level of responsibilities that are on the floor. So I also have not had the opportunity to sit down and watch the entire interview. I've only seen the, half dozen or dozen clips that are circulating around Magic media right now, or Magic social media. But it seems like a lot of fun. And we talked about this with Bob, as he said a lot of Cavs Twitter is like, wait a minute, do I not hate these Wagner brothers? And a lot of Magic Twitter was like, wait a minute, do I not hate George Niang? So that was a pretty fun and interesting dynamic that came out of this pod, is that, at the end of the day, regardless of what happens during an NBA game, we don't really know what these guys are like in real life. And a guy like, Mini Van Niang can be pretty likable, even though he came off as a massive douche during that playoff series.
2 things. First off, I have to publicly apologize. His co-host name is also Kevin. So from one Kevin to another, I just looked it up. From one Kevin to another, I apologize, fellow Kevin. The other thing, another clip that I saw on social media that I thought was hilarious, was when they were recapping Franz's essentially spin move ankle breaker on Niang, and how he pointed to him and stuff. And that was really funny. But I love Niang going, this is my podcast. We're not going to, and then the social clip, at least they put the clip right up there. Yeah. So they played it back. It was super funny. But yeah, that definitely looks super entertaining. And like I said, I'll definitely watch it when I've got some downtime this weekend.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, I believe that Franz was teed up after pointing at Niang in that game, which was pretty entertaining. But yeah, if you guys have the opportunity to find that, I think it's called The Bench Seat. Find that on your podcast platforms or on YouTube, which is where I think Kevin and I will probably end up checking that out. But we do have a little bit more Magic news here, is that the Magic have signed 4 free agents, I believe, to Exhibit 10 deals. The Magic don't typically disclose contract information, at least not in their press releases here. But Jarrett Culver, Myron Gardner, Jalen Sawson, and Trey Scott all have been signed to the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic's regular roster spots are filled. They do have they have 1 two-way spot remaining. Or actually, no, they have 2 two-way spots remaining. We think one of those is going to go to Mac McClung, but that has not been made official yet. So these are all guys that are going to be participating in training camp, and we'll see if any of those guys end up making the roster or getting a two-way deal. I don't think Jarrett Culver, believe we've talked about this already, with him being involved with the Summer League team, but I don't believe he is eligible for a two-way spot. So we'll be keeping an eye on those guys. And as we get closer to Media Day, I'm sure we'll get more news about more Exhibit 10 signings as well. That's really it for Magic news this week. Let's go ahead and get into our Cavaliers preview with our friend Bob Schmidt from the Fear the Fro pod. And now, Magic fans, we are joined by a very special guest. You may be familiar with our guest today as we continue this Eastern Conference preview series here. Bob Schmidt is returning after we did our preview of the Magic Cavs playoff series. Not really later in the season, right before the offseason, because our season was a little bit shorter than the Cleveland Cavaliers. But our friend Bob Schmidt, welcome back, Bob. How are you doing, man? How has your offseason been?
It's been great. It's been great. I'm looking forward to this new season, though.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to talk a lot with you about the upcoming season, the off season, some interesting moves or non-moves on the Cavs front, and obviously we'll talk about that. But first, Bob, I want to go back to that series that Jonathan mentioned. Obviously, our viewers, our listeners, very familiar with the Magic Cavs series from a Magic perspective, full of ups and downs, twists and turns, ending up in a 7-game series there in Cleveland. But I'm curious from your perspective, covering the Cavs, watching the Cavs, being a Cavs fan, kind of how was this series experienced by Cavs fans, over the course of those 7 games?
Well, I kind of almost look at it in 2 sections, which is the pre-Jared Allen injury and then what followed after that. Because definitely began the series fantastic. It looked like it was going to be exactly what the Cavaliers seemingly had wanted when they possibly manufactured their way into that spot. But then after those, as soon as you went back to Orlando, you saw that this wasn't a team that was just going to lay down. And I thought, barring what we got from Donovan Mitchell in those final couple games, the 89 points over the 2-game span, it was a hard-fought series. It definitely was more difficult than I expected it to be, given the playoff experience that the Cavs had the year before. My hopes coming in were that the role guys for the Magic would largely be inconsistent on the road, and that would be enough for the Cavaliers to just be able to power through on star power. But after Allen went down, I think the things that were surprising to me was that it took unbelievable play from Donovan Mitchell on one leg and Evan Mobley doing something that I certainly didn't expect. I thought we would struggle with Allen out, and he seemed to just raise his game, especially on the defensive end, in a way where Evan Mobley closed that series out just incredibly well. We needed every bit of it, because if it weren't for some uncharacteristically bad shooting struggles from your guys, like that all came unfortunately at the same time. Franz had started out that series so well, and then to have that game where everybody basically disappeared from outside the arc at the same time, because Suggs was far better than I expected him to be over the course of the series. The shooting it didn't sustain to the end, and Franz obviously went out in a rough way, but for a large part of that series, I actually thought that he might have been the more impactful player than Paolo. Over the course of the full 7, I didn't feel that way. But I definitely thought he came out of the gates very aggressive, started very well, and as the series wore on, I thought Evan was able to kind of make more of an impact and impose his will a little bit more. And Donovan I can't even say enough about the guy to do what he did considering the situation we were in, because we needed every one of those buckets. I mean, there was a fourth quarter where he scored, I think, every point for the Cavaliers during that series. So it wasn't easy. I gained a tremendous amount of respect for the Magic over the course of the series in terms of how ready they were to play immediately in their first kind of playoff test. So, and I think this is a team that's going to be right there with the Cavs battling it out again this year.
Yeah, the first couple of games in Cleveland, you come away from those as a Magic fan and you're like, well, we were, somewhat close at different points in those games, couldn't hit a shot. Let's get the role guys home. Let's get them knocking down some shots, and the offense should pick up. And we saw that in games 3 and in games 4 and in game 6. And then game 5, you talked about Evan Mobley, but that block on Wagner, at the rim towards the end of that game, obviously was a big deal. And then being up double digits in the first quarter of game 7 on the road, and then Donovan Mitchell and that experience sort of reared its head, and the inexperience of the Magic, I think, really showed itself. But what were some of the things that surprised you about the Magic, or like really the flow of that series?
I think the first for me would be, I thought Suggs had a tremendous impact in a way that I didn't expect. Now, everybody knows defensively what he can bring, but at least over the history of the last couple years with the Cavs and Magic, he's got dinged up. He's had to miss some time. To expect him to come in and be what he was on the defensive end wasn't that surprising, but I thought he was surprisingly good in giving you some complementary offense. that was more consistent than I expected it to be. Of course, with the one game exception, really. But Franz, I thought, was fantastic in terms of being aggressive, getting to the rim, going for what his best looks were especially throughout the early part of the series. I kind of expected both our teams to have that situation where when the role guys were on the road, their shots would disappear. But I thought, if anything, disappointed me, I guess, with the Magic is that I expected your stars to kind of stagger their impact more, like Paolo and Franz, and I thought that your bench would outclass ours over the course of the series. And I don't think they did so in a way that was consistent enough or night in, night out enough that it was able to make up for those few nights where your stars just had rough shooting outings. Paolo was, of course, he was fantastic. Franz was, by and large, I know he went out on a bad note, and I'm sympathetic to that because that's exactly what Jared Allen was dealing with after the Knicks series. Or, sometimes to have those roughest games at the end of your run, I feel like it shifts the narrative too far in a direction that maybe isn't warranted, because I definitely was impressed with what he was doing in the early part of the series, especially. I think that Evan just raised his game, and being able to defend, being shifted to kind of the full-time five, he was so much more than, and not just in the Magic series, but in the Celtics series as well. I didn't go into the postseason feeling like, if you would tell me that Jared Allen is going to give us 17 and 14 over the first couple of games, and he was just manhandling your guys, and then we were going to lose him, and Evan was going to be able to do that, I wouldn't have believed it. And I felt the same way in the Boston series. I thought that he looked fantastic in the full-time five position in a way that I've never really felt confident he could be. And I realize Orlando and Boston maybe aren't the biggest teams in the world, but the way that he imposed his will was enough that the Cavaliers were able to escape that first round with a win. I mean, it easily could have gone a different way if a few guys just had, better shooting performances when it mattered.
You kind of answered it there, but I'm curious, when you look specifically at the Cavs matchup with the Magic in that 7-game series, was there anything that you learned about the Cavs? Maybe anything that surprised you? What you thought you knew about this team through 82 games, and then what you saw in that 7-game series. Obviously, you talked about Evan Mobley there. Maybe it's him, or is there something else maybe that you learned about the Cavs team during that series?
Well, I do think Donovan responded in a big way. I agree with what you said. I alluded to it before, which is that I came away from that series feeling like, listen, obviously I love Jared Allen. The name of the podcast was based on him. But if there is a future, despite his extending this summer, that found him on another team, I think Evan showed me a lot in the direction of, okay, there is a world where Evan Mobley can be a full-time five, despite my concerns about his weight or his strength. Those should continue to improve. And he's able to do things athletically, like even that block, for him to do it with his offhand. I don't blame Franz for not thinking he was going to be able to get to that, because that's not the type of coordination a lot of bigs could pull off, to be able to recover on that and to be able to get it with your offhand. So I felt great about that. And then Donovan, to come off what was a very uneven Knicks series where he didn't play particularly well, and to be in this series where, they came out fast, they kind of got punched in the mouth, and then he had to carry just an absurd load on the offensive end while injured, and he delivered. So I thought it went a long way to kind of put some shine back on his playoff reputation, because in the bubble, it was looking fantastic. He had some fantastic games, and then Jalen had a good series against him with the Mavericks, and then again, they struggled with the Knicks. So I thought this past playoff run did a lot to kind of calm fears amongst the Cavs faithful and even just Donovan supporters in general, that, you know what? Yeah, he might not be a top 5 guy, but he's definitely right there in that top 10 conversation and can deliver on a playoff stage when given the opportunity.
We're going to interrupt our conversation with our friend Bob Schmidt really quickly to tell you all about Jam Hot Chicken. Jam Hot Chicken is proudly serving the city beautiful, and Jam Hot Chicken is bringing Jam's culture and hot chicken to the heart of Winter Park. Jam Hot Chicken, a Nashville and LA inspired hot chicken shack, locally owned and operated in Winter Park, Florida, located at 400 West New England Avenue, Suite 13 over there in Handville Square. You can follow Jam Hot Chicken on all social media at Jam Hot Chicken, and check them out at jamhotchickenfl.com to access the menu, online ordering, music playlists, and all things Jam Hot. And Jam Hot Chicken is now on Uber Eats. So let's say you're looking to do something for lunch on a Wednesday. Maybe you can't leave the office. You don't want to leave home. Open up your phone, go to that Uber Eats app, and you, as long as you're local to Winter Park, you can have that hot and delivered fresh to you with the Uber Eats app, whether it be the box, which is mine and Kevin's personal favorite. They've got their milkshakes back this time of year. You definitely cannot go wrong. Once again, Jam Hot Chicken, proudly serving the city beautiful. Shout out to our friends over at Jam Hot Chicken.
Also, gotta shout out our patrons. Today, especially, we're shouting out our Improv 221, Jose Esquilin, Gabe Gaines, who just re-upped on his Patreon subscription. Thank you for that, Gabe. Kason Green, and Michael Martin. They are 5 of our patrons, specifically our Hall of Fame and Elite tier patrons. What are patrons? They're part of our Patreon community. Those are the people that financially support the Six Man Show and make everything that we do possible. From podcast episodes like this, to our live post-game shows on YouTube, to the Six Fan Show, to our watch parties and our events, and everything in between. None of it would be possible without our Patreon. So thank you so much to all of our patrons. If you'd like to join our Patreon community, you can visit us at patreon.com/the Six Man Show and check out the different tiers that we have available at different price points, which offer different kinds of benefits. And so definitely check that out if you want to support the work that we do here at the Six Man Show, just growing the Orlando Magic fan community. So big shout out to all of our patrons. And now let's get back to our conversation with Bob Schmidt.
I just think back to like that second half game 6 where, for the Magic, it's winner or, go home for the season. And Donovan with like 50 points, like as happy as we were with, some of our guys and the way that they had stepped up, I think we were walked away from that game equally as impressed in Donovan Mitchell. And we're just relieved that he sort of ran out of gas and ran out of time at the end of that game. But you all win that series, and both teams knew in that game 7, you win this game, you're going on to face a giant in the eventual championship Celtics. But what do you think went right or more so went wrong for the Cavs in that series against Boston?
Truthfully, I felt great about that series. I felt like the Cavs played them tougher than any team they faced. And I get that you could look at the final series score, but that was a series where, we didn't have Donovan for a big chunk of it. They shut him down. Jared Allen never came back. Evan Mobley had his best playoff series of his career. The best basketball he's played over the course of his career. So while on the final tally, it may not look like it was that competitive, it certainly felt competitive to me in a way where I thought, okay, a healthy Cavs team, I like our ability to, have that series outcome at least be up for grabs next time. And maybe that's delusional on my part. I understand how many things have to go right to beat a team like the Boston Celtics, but I didn't leave that series. Truthfully, I felt like that's why there was some conversation about, well, if our playoffs had ended against the Magic, JB's fired the next day. Because it extended and we at least showed up, everybody going into this, the best case scenario, or I should say the acceptable worst case scenario for the Cavs last season was just show up in the second round, make it a competitive series. And this will be a step forward from the previous season where they got ran out by the Knicks unexpectedly. That's exactly what they did. Now, the manner in which they did it, I wouldn't have predicted. I wouldn't have thought we had to fight so hard to get past the Magic, and then we would show up against the Celtics despite what the kind of game count would say. I felt good about their performance there. And I think that's maybe part of the reason why you saw that decision on JB get dragged out a little bit into the offseason, because I think there were people who were like, well, is this enough? Have we seen enough that maybe we want to run it back? And I think ultimately he had just lost too much of the locker room. So they decided, we got to make a change. Or, Donovan wanted to make a change and they decided we got to make a change. I don't know that we'll ever know the full truth, but in the aftermath of that playoffs where that article came out from Shams that just torched the entire team, if you had told me that when I'm talking to you tonight, we would be running back essentially the same roster with a rookie, that I would have never believed it. And yet here we are a couple months later, and there's been 3 massive extensions for 3 of the 4 members of our core 4. And really the only big change is the head coaching decision.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to talking about the Cavs offseason. We're definitely curious. Obviously, it did take some time for that coaching change to happen, which we'll start there. The move from JB Bickerstaff to Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson, I know a guy that a lot of Magic fans wanted several years ago, when we eventually hired Jamal Mosley. But I'm curious from your perspective about that move. Obviously, you talked about the timing of the move being interesting, but let's talk more specifically about Kenny Atkinson. What are your thoughts about him being the new head coach of the Cavs?
Well, I'm excited because I think I, like most Cavs fans, arrived at the same place with JB, which was there were a couple frustrating trends. One is it seemed like the guy did the best when he had the least amount of options. When we had a full contingent of guys at full health, it always felt like we weren't delivering to the expectations that the fan base or the front office had, or that we had because they told us we should have them. And then we get into those situations like the middle of last season when we went on that unbelievable run and we just didn't have the manpower for him to, outthink himself. He just had to play who was available to him, and we go running through, admittedly, a lighter part of the schedule, but with a skeleton crew where it was basically Mitchell and Allen as the main components of that, and a lot of our role guys who have delivered, admittedly, inconsistently for much of their time here. So I was at that point where, one, if Donovan Mitchell says, I'll resign, but you got to change the coach, then as much as I may cringe a little bit at the way that, player empowerment can impact teams around the league, I would make that trade 1,000 times over. Because for him to commit, if he doesn't buy in, then what are the chances the other guys do? Because this isn't a locker room full of demonstrative, negative players. These are by and large like pretty nice guys, maybe to a fault to some degree. And so if they had tired on the message of JB, then it was time to move forward. And secondly, I think the other thing that justifies it is, for as good as we may have been in the last couple regular seasons, we get to the postseason and the offense has left some things to be desired. Now, sure, there's been incredible individual runs from guys like Donovan, and you got the second round series with Evan. But the thing that's been lacking is this feeling of a team continuity, a team chemistry that you see it with Okoro now in the situation he's in. He's had a couple seasons in a row where he's taken steps forward in the regular season, and then unfortunately in the postseason, it hasn't ended fantastically. The same could be said for George Niang this year. He was stringing together a pretty decent 2024 after January, and then the playoffs hit, and he was horrific. So it's this idea that, maybe we can function better as an offensive unit in a playoff environment where teams will gear up to take things away from you with a coach who's a little more nuanced on that side of the court. And I think every Cavalier fan to a fault will tell you, we want to see more pace. We want to see them figure out ways to incorporate guys that maybe felt like they got lost in the shuffle a bit with JB. His biggest detractors will say, why the hell did you play Niang so much? Now, Dean Wade has his injury issues. I don't totally blame him for that, but they'll crush him for not going away from him sooner. And Sam Merrill is a guy who's in and out of the lineup. Some nights he looks fantastic, and then he doesn't play the next night, and you were wondering, well, is a guy like Kenny Atkinson, can he find a way to get more efficient play out of a Karis LeVert? Can he find a way to get a defined role for a guy like Sam Merrill? And then can he find a way to kind of iron out some of the wrinkles with playing the two bigs? Because that was something JB largely went away from in the second half of the regular season last year. He was starting to stagger Evan and Jared. He was playing them at the beginning of the first half and the third half, but then he was kind of breaking up their minutes. And the question you have to ask yourself is that tenable on a full-time basis, or do we need a coach who can figure out a way to kind of get back to what we saw 2 seasons ago, which was a little more analytically positive, dual minutes from those bigs? Because you're committing a ton of money to that top four, an absolute absurd amount of money. So you really don't want to be in a situation where you're having to say, well, these guys can't play together. You want everyone to be able to mix and match and be able to give you different looks for different lineups that you're facing.
Now, you mentioned the extensions, and you mentioned the large amount of money that you committed to some of these guys over the offseason. Donovan with the 3-year, $150 million extension. Jared Allen, the 5-year, $100 million extension. And then Mobley got the rookie max extension, the 5-year, $224 million that we saw Franz get the same as well. What were your thoughts on those extensions? Did any of them surprise you, or was the timing of any of those surprising?
Well, the timing, it was definitely a surprise on the Jared Allen one. I'll say that. I mean, the Donovan Mitchell one, I figured they would take any extension under any terms that he was willing to sign it for. So that didn't surprise me. I thought there was a chance Mitchell might actually push his to next summer just to keep a gun to the head of the front office. But the fact that he didn't is great, because at least I don't think it'll quiet the talk whenever you're in a smaller market. It's really just a reset, and the noise will ramp up depending on how we do compared to expectations over the next couple of years. But at least it quiets it for a little bit. The Jared Allen one, that one I did not see coming at all. I thought that there was a chance that Jared Allen would do what a lot of these guys on teams that are, they've pushed all their chips into the middle of the table would do, which is take it to the end of his contract and then demand the most money possible, knowing that the Cavs can't afford to replace you. So they're going to give you what you want. And instead, for him to ink an extension, because let's say you're Jared Allen and you're the most shopped guy on the team. His name always comes up because of how much people love Mobley, and they view him as more expendable. And also his price tag is so positive at $20 million a year that he has a very robust trade interest out there. Now, the thing I've never liked about that is I think there's an element to how I view it as, listen, we're not a deep team in the front court. Our third big coming into this next season is Tristan Thompson, arguably, or Dean Wade if he's healthy. However you want to look at it, though, just the fact that, we've got two fantastic starters in Evan and Jared, but beyond that, it's not exactly a wealth of options to man spot minutes at the 5. So it becomes this thing of like, are you really that eager to get off of him to get this, hypothetical fit, this Cam Johnson style stretch 4, because you think that's what will fit better with Evan? And I've always pushed back against that because I believe any front court rotation needs at least 3 viable NBA players. And if you tell me one of those is Jared Allen making an average over the next 5 years of $28 million, I think that's a great value to production ratio that you should not be eager to get rid of. Even if he's not he's going to play 38 minutes a night guy. I don't think you need that when you have a guy as elite as Evan. But I want to be able to have altering looks when you face those teams that are just monstrous in the East. When you face those big men like your Joel Embiids or your Nikola Jokic's, I want to be able to have a legitimately large lineup to throw against people. So if there's one of those 3 that gives me the most discomfort, surprisingly for me, that would be Evan. I think Jared Allen's deal is so movable. I have zero concerns about that moving forward, because beyond the fact that you look at a guy like Hartenstein, who signs in for roughly the equivalent amount of money per year on his new deal. Well, that kicks in now. Jared Allen's 3 years, $90 million doesn't even kick in for 2 more seasons. By the time we reach that point with all this new TV money in the fold, that's going to seem like a bargain. And the fact that he's locked in for 5 years, I thought there was a part of him that would say, you know what? They put me in every trade rumor. I'm not going to sign any extension because I want to be able to put my thumb on the scale of if they start shopping me, I can pull a Kyrie Irving and say, well, I'm not going to extend anywhere that you trade me to. And then he can kind of dictate whether he's kept or moved based on his willingness to participate in the process. But now he has none of those assurances. By extending, I mean, he's kind of at the mercy of the Cavs. And I have to think they've probably told him that they want him around long term, but things change very fast. You can't really take that, at face value. So who knows long term what happens. Evan is the one I'm a little anxious about because I do think it's a lot of money. And unlike you guys, where we're looking at guys who are at the same point in their, career arc as far as how many years in the league they are. But the difference is we're already on the books for huge money for a lot of the guys on the roster. You weren't, in a way where I get why it's a no-brainer to spend the money because you don't have tons of money committed to other people. With us, the fact that we didn't fight that number down at all, and I'm not so delusional that I don't realize Evan is far more important than Isaac Okoro, but we're battling this war with our role players, our guys on the fringes. We're squeezing Okoro to try to stay under the luxury tax this year and asking a guy who just watched, Cole Anthony a year ago signs 3 for $39 million. And now they're asking Okoro to settle for a deal somewhere between $8 and $10 million a year. I get why that would be tough to stomach if you're him. A year ago, I mean, salaries are supposed to go up every year. And a year ago, you watch guys like Denny and Neesmith and Cole Anthony ink extensions that are all above and beyond what the Cavs are willing to give you now after they just doled out maximum money to 3 other guys on the team. So it's a different situation. I wish that they were able to claw just a little bit more money back from those top salary guys so that we wouldn't have to just pummel the restricted free agency leverage we have with an Isaac Okoro. And if he signs for the $8.5 million that he would need to sign in order for us to avoid that luxury tax, well then bravo, Kobe, you pulled it off. But it's it's this type of diplomacy that we saw him employ with a Colin Sexton too, who eventually got traded to the Jazz in the Mitchell deal, where, when he loves you, he'll pay you without question. But if you're these guys on the fringes, those guys are starting to get pinched in a way where I'm sure it's very tough to accept for Isaac, because he didn't come to an extension before last season. And I think if we're being honest, the offer on the table was probably more than what it is right now.
It's interesting. On our last episode, we talked about kind of how the future decisions that the Magic front office has to make. And in some ways, the Cavs are a few years ahead of us in that way. The fact that you're having to throw money at these guys to keep them around, to keep your core intact. And, it's definitely something the Magic will be facing in just a few years. You mentioned this earlier briefly, but like the Magic, the Cavs largely are going to come into this season with the same team. Couple minor tweaks, couple minor changes. Same thing with Orlando. Where does that sit, when it comes to Cavs fans? Obviously, you're very limited in what you can do, like you just mentioned. But the idea of coming into the 24-25 season with largely the same roster, kind of what are the thoughts, the sentiments about that?
Well, I think it depends on the level of fandom you have. If you're the type that pores over cap sheets and really gets into the numbers of it, then you knew this was coming. I mean, you kind of knew that the Cavs had made their fringe moves last year with Strus and Yang, and that when we got here to this summer, essentially we were working with part of a taxpayer mid-level exception, maybe, and then whatever happened with our draft pick. Now, I think Cavs fans will tell you they're very, very pleased with how it worked out so far with our draft pick based on Summer League. Before people saw Tyson, I think a lot of people were like, we don't need another smallish wing. But when you watched him play, because there was a ton of people who wanted the guy you guys nabbed, De Silva, or a Johnny Furphy, a 6'8", 6'9" guy, somebody who could hit threes, who could play that small ball four. And De Silva was fantastic, of course, in Summer League. So I think you guys got a real find there, despite the fact that I wondered, do you really need it? Do you really need another one of these giant wings? But congratulations to you. I hope that works out fantastically. Meanwhile, Tyson, my feeling in watching him was, once these guys see the way that he plays, he has that type of Josh Hart element to him where, yeah, he might be 6'6", 6'7", but the dude fights on the glass, and he's physical in a way that I definitely could see him logging some minutes as a small ball four when we need. I think he's more of a, 2-3 really, but I think he'll comfortably slot in at the 3. And the thing that I do feel good about is, yeah, I would have liked the Cavs to figure out a way to add more around the fringes, but I understand given the cap situation they were in. I think there is part of the fan base who's like, I don't care. You have to figure out a way to make it work, which is one of those things where, I always hear people, like my boss will always say to me, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And that's sort of the way I feel here. It's like, if you can tell me what he could have done so differently here, well, then I'll listen to you. But really, at the end of this postseason, the way I feel is, what could he have done? Could he have rescinded Isaac Okoro and then he gets part of it? Maybe that would have worked out. Maybe he could have said, okay, we want to get off the cap hold that's just going to prevent us from really doing anything else. We'll rescind Okoro and we'll try to spend that money the way that, say, a team like the Bucks did, where they got, DeLon Wright and Gary Trent Jr. and Taurean Prince and some of these guys on real cheap deals. And I loved what they did for the limited amount of flexibility they had. I thought they added some legitimate NBA talents who will help round out some of their depth. We decided that we were going to see this thing through with Isaac, and sadly, that meant that we had a few million at most to work with, so it basically became Jalen Tyson and running it back. And I expect Okoro will still be on the team this year, but the thing I'll say about Jalen Tyson is it makes me feel really good about knowing that Karis LeVert and Isaac Okoro, their futures are up in the air. If Okoro's on a qualifying offer this year and with LeVert on an expiring, I think it's unrealistic to think all three of those guys are on this team a year from now. And with what Tyson did in the summer league and how ready physically he seems to be to play right now, I think he's a good hedge because he can do a little bit of everything. He's a reasonably good shooter. He had a year at Texas Tech where he played largely off ball. He was largely on ball against Cal, so he can facilitate a little bit. He rebounds fantastically for a guy his size. It's really just going to be, can he defend his position in the NBA, and can he operate off ball? Because that's definitely what's going to be called upon sooner in the NBA. And I felt fantastic about his summer league. So in that regard, I think for the few avenues the Cavs had, I feel about as good as I can But it's going to be limiting these next several years without a ton of draft capital. They're going to have to make some, undrafted free agent finds. They're going to have to make some, minimal vet min signings that make an impact, because otherwise it's improvement from within.
Now, looking ahead to this season, we're just about 4 weeks out now. With all the moves that have happened in the East, you look at the Knicks, a lot of people expect them to be towards the top of the East. The 76ers adding Paul George. The Magic, adding Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Not a lot of moves, but, a significant one nonetheless. And like you've talked about, adding Jalen Tyson, Kenny Atkinson acquisition, I think is a big acquisition as well. But with you all from a roster perspective, mostly running it back, how do you feel about where the Cavs should end up or compete in the East this season?
Well, if you're to believe Vegas, they have them at around 48.5 for the over-under. The thing that I feel good about is last year, the core three, we lost 79 games between Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell, basically, after All-Star break, was never right. So I do feel like less about the changes in the roster. The real opportunity for improvement is just health and continuity. Because I do think these guys 2 years ago showed that they could play together. And I think Darius had what most people would deem a bad year last year. So I think there's a lot of room for, if he returns to the form of 2 years ago, efficiency, counting stats wise, whatever, there's a lot more we can do with that. And I think a lot of people expect a big step forward from Evan, given the focus that there's going to be with a new coach and the work that Atkinson's done with guys like Horford and Brook Lopez and your Draymonds, and he's had a lot of opportunity to play with what I would call, unconventional bigs, guys who can do more than just post guys up, guys who can pass, guys who can stretch the floor out a little bit. And that's what everybody wants from Evan, is to find ways to unlock him, in motion, getting him the ball at the high post, letting him create a little bit, stretching his range more. So those are all things I think, we're not unrealistic in the sense that we know in order for the Cavs to take another step forward, there has to be continued internal growth.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Even like you mentioned, the Celtics series. If you guys are fully healthy, I'm in the camp that, again, I would probably pick the Celtics, but I definitely think a fully healthy Cavs team could have pushed that maybe even all the way to 7. I definitely think that's possible. So with everything we've all discussed here, Bob, everything that's on the table for 24-25, potential internal growth, all the extensions we talked about, new coaching hire, what would ultimately be a successful season in the mind of at least you or maybe most Cavs fans coming into this season? And on the flip side, what would be considered a failure for the Cavs this season?
Well, I think any step back is a failure. I think most Cavs fans want to see us push to the Eastern Conference Finals, or at least fall in the second round to a team that we legitimately feel is better than us. Like if they ended up drawing the Celtics again and they lost to the Celtics again, I think people could stomach that. I think, it'll depend on how we play. If we played horrible, that would be one thing. But I think the biggest thing Cavs fans want here is a healthy season and just to continue to take steps in the right direction. Because if there is one thing I will say about the amount of money the Cavs have tied up in their stars, at least those stars are young stars. And there is a reason to believe that they'll continue to get better, as opposed to being in a Milwaukee situation where you feel like, okay, hopefully we can keep this thing tied together and it doesn't start to unravel. I think, if anything, it feels like we've under-delivered on the potential of what this roster should do, and that's what people want to see. So that's my hope, would be an Eastern Conference Finals appearance, but I could stomach a strong second-round appearance if we lost to a team that was legitimately better.
Last thing that I want to ask you, Bob, this is a little bit more fun, somewhat unrelated to our two teams. Have you seen the latest episode of George Niang's podcast that he did with the Wagner brothers? And what was your thought? Because we've had a lot of fun seeing those clips.
Okay, so that's in my thing to watch, because I've been seeing on my timeline people say things like, you know what? The Wagner brothers are actually pretty cool. Like I went in wanting to hate them, and they seemed pretty chill. And now it makes me think, because there's nothing I like nursing more than a grudge. But I will say, this is the other thing I took away from your team in that first round, is that I fully went in expecting to hate Mo. I didn't think he had the most impactful series, but what I ended up walking away feeling was God damn, if Wendell Carter Jr. and Gary Harris weren't so much more physical than I guess I really truly appreciated over the course of that series. Wendell especially, because I figured it would be Mo as a runaway, but he's a smart dude as far as knowing, okay, the ball's up, it's going on the glass, just get a little forearm into a guy or just move him a little bit in a way where that was something that I was surprised to come away feeling at the end of the series. I still have to watch the Niang podcast, but I'm definitely going to, because it is making the rounds on Cavs Twitter, and I feel like, okay, I gotta see what's so likable about these guys.
That's so funny that you say that, because we talked about this at the beginning of the show, and we've heard this on Twitter. Magic fans are saying the same thing about Niang that you said about the Wagner brothers. Like, you know what, this Niang guy is kind of funny. He's kind of cool. He's kind of chill.
But the difference is George isn't really a threat to hurt you on the court. Like, it's easier to be like, that guy's pretty cool when you're not scared of what he will do to your team from a basketball perspective. The difference is with, like, Franz and Mo can do enough on a court where you're like, yeah, not only do I not like when they rough up our guys or trash talk, but they also contributed to a loss for us. That hasn't happened nearly as much. Niang and Ingles had that hilarious relationship that dated back to Utah, where it's like, okay, George is clearly very funny. But it just goes to show you how frustrated people were with his play, that despite a personality that should make him a beloved fan favorite for every Cavalier, I would still say that he takes a fair amount of abuse on Cavs Twitter because of the performance, in a way where I see him on this pod and I think, it looks like he's slimming down. Maybe this is just me. When you see basketball players next to basketball players, they can look slovenly, and maybe I'm like, well, he's in a podcast studio, it's deceptive. But I think he's getting in better shape to the point where I'm hoping for a redemption season on the court from George, because he is a hilarious guy and a fantastic personality. And one of the few guys who, and I have a buddy, Mac Perry, who does a Cavs podcast, that whenever these guys show up on what I would call like a fan podcast, I immediately love them. Because that's the type of thing where I'm like, yeah, these guys don't take themselves that seriously. And George is not one of those people that does that. So I think he's very aware of, where his shortcomings were last season. And he has a good attitude and a good perspective on life.
Yeah, I think in terms of like the basketball aspect, a lot of people knew what to expect in this Magic Cavs series, but I don't think I at least expected it to get as chippy as it did, as quickly as it did. Like pretty early into game one, like George Niang is getting in Markelle Fultz's face, talking trash, and then from that point, the whole city of Orlando was like, "F this guy!" Like we hate this guy. So to see some of them coming around to him, with that podcast with the Wagner brothers has been pretty fun. And Magic fans are also saying like, "Hey, this guy looks like he's actually lost weight," because everybody was, calling him what was it, like Minivan Niang or something like that during the series. So that was fun, but definitely check that out when you get a chance. And Bob, once again, man, thanks for taking the time to join the show here. This was a lot of fun, and look forward to watching you guys over the course of this upcoming season. And who knows, maybe we'll be back here in 9-10 months recapping another Magic Cavs playoff series.
I hope so. I would love to run it back. It's always nice to have a shared, like an opponent you're already familiar with, because it's a good measuring stick. You know what you should be doing better than or worse than. So
awesome. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, guys.
And a big thank you once again to our friend Bob Schmidt from the Fear the Fro podcast for joining us and previewing the Cleveland Cavaliers as we get ready for this next upcoming season. I don't know about you, Kevin, but I think I'd be pretty jazzed up for another Magic Cavs first round series next year. I'd like to have playoff, home court advantage in the playoffs this time around, though.
Yeah, that would make a big difference, as we believe it would have made in the last series. But Bob makes great points about health. That team by the end of the Magic series was not healthy. Obviously, actually earlier in this series, with Jarrett Allen going down. So I would definitely be curious, with another year of growth and internal development from the Magic versus a fully healthy Cleveland Cavaliers with Orlando home court advantage. I think that would be a very good series. Would the Magic win it? I don't know. But could it go 7 games again? Abso-freaking-lutely. And I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Adding KCP into the mix, I definitely like our odds.
Yeah.
And as it is with every playoff series, health is going to be one of the biggest factors in terms of that. But yeah, hope you guys are enjoying this preview series that we've been doing, just trying to find teams that we expect the Magic to be competing, for playoff standings with. So, let us know what you guys think. And again, a big thanks to our guy Bob over there at Fear the Fro. If you're looking for Cavaliers coverage, you're not going to find any better place than that. Kevin, I think that is going to do it for this one. What do we say? Want to wrap this one up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we will be back on Monday with another episode. That is going to be Kevin's last episode before he goes under the knife.
That's right.
As they say. So when I say that, it just sounds weird. It sounds gruesome.
That's true.
But that is going to do it for this one. For Kevin Tucker, this has been Jonathan Osborne. You all have been listening to The Sixth Man Show, and we will catch you guys next time. See ya.
Thanks for listening to The Sixth Man Show. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Spotify to get new episodes downloaded directly to your phone. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to give us a 5-star rating and a review. It helps out the show a lot. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Sixth Man Show. We'll catch you guys next time. Go Magic!